Good morning, guys. I wanted to have a look at the Skype for Business 2019 preview that got announced a little while ago. I'm a little bit late to the scene with this. I've been meaning to look at it for a little while. So I thought we'd start with perhaps looking at a build for it. How do we get the preview working? So let's crack on straight with that. So firstly, let's have a look at my environment that I've got set up. And this is the one we'll use to actually build it. So I have a couple of 2016 servers. All we need for this really is a domain controller. So I've got one called MDSDC. This is in a Windows 2016 forest called macdoesstuff.local. Now I know local's fallen out of favor, but you know it'll work just as well for this this build demo. I've also built a machine for our Skype for Business server. So if we look in our corporate setup here, in our servers, we'll see our server called Skype for Business. And that's our server on this screen here. So what we're going to do is go through this process of building. So at the end of this, you should have a function in Skype for Business 2019 unit that you can go off and have a play with. I'll post the relevant links in the description, and it will explain everything about the early beta, so you can get stuck in there and have a good look at everything. If I was to look at the notes, the thing that sticks out for me at the moment are really around the hardware recommendations. I mean, if you look at the recommendations for standard edition, you'll see they've been uplifted in terms of the processor type. We're now looking at E5 2673s in terms of the recommended specification. Also, a standard server, the minimum recommendation is 32 gigs of RAM. What I find interesting though is if you look at the recommended hardware for front-end servers, which I assume as it's separate to the standard edition that we're looking at enterprise edition servers, the recommendation for that now is 64 gig of RAM. So it's worth checking out those specs and just being aware as to what is actually required. Now the server I've built for this doesn't have that kind of capacity. I think I've allocated, let me have a look, 4 cores and 16 gig of RAM. So let's see if we can build on that. I haven't as yet done anything with the DNS configurations. If we look at that, you'll see at the moment I've just got the core DNS set up for my domain controller and my forest. So we'll look at the DNS setup as and when we work through the build. The first thing we need to look at then is getting the prereqs installed on our Skype for Business server. Now this is just a straight Windows Server 2016 build. Now there are several prereqs. Now they're all qualified in the docs that I'll link to below. But fortunately, like the other builds, there is just a PowerShell command that we can use that'll actually build all those components for us. So what I'm going to do is select that and paste it into an elevated PowerShell. There we go. Let's let that run. It'll take a few minutes to complete. There we go, and that bit's all done. So now we're going to join up and connect the Skype for Business 2019 ISO. I've attached the ISO to this virtual machine. So let's go and have a look at it. I mean, I've got auto run disabled on here. You'll notice the name, OCS eval. That's a bit of a shout out to the past, that one. I'm sure some of you probably started your lives with this particular version, Office Communication Server. So we're going to pop into there and go into setup. Now it's probably going to ask for .NET 4.7, I think, because I remember reading that from the notes. Now I've downloaded it there, so let's see if it asks for it. Yeah, it does immediately. So let's get .NET 4.7 installed. I'll include the download link for you, and then we'll come back and revisit this installer. So that's done, didn't take too long. So let's try firing up that setup program again, and we'll see if we get any further. If you've installed Skype, then most of this is fairly familiar. So I'm going to connect to the internet to check for updates. I've got a fairly decent internet connection, so hopefully that shouldn't cause too many issues. We're going to accept the license agreement there. And that's interesting. For some reason it failed to connect to the update, so I'm just going to continue without updates. And here we are. It looks very, very similar to Skype for Business 2015, so we're just going to go through the normal process. First thing I'm going to do is prepare the Active Directory. So let's go off and do that piece. Anyone who's familiar with Skype for Business 2015 will be very familiar with this process. So let's go through and we're just going to prepare the schema. And that's done. So we'll hit finish and we'll do the preparation of the current forest next. There we go. And that's finished too. Next one, we need to do the current domain. That seems to take no time at all. So quick, I missed it. I tend to see a lot of issues, people setting this up for the first time because they missed this point at the bottom. It is fairly easy. What I'm going to do is just go into users and computers. Here we go. And what you should find now is a group called CS Administrators. CS Administrator, there you go. Now, to manage the Skype for Business platform fully, you need to be a member of this group. So what I tend to do in my labs or my demo environments is I change the members and just add in domain admins. Now, of course, you probably wouldn't do that in a live configuration, but it works well enough for our purposes here. There we go. So now we've done that bit. So what we can do is go back and we can start looking at preparing the first standard edition server, because I'm going to deploy the standard edition. Before we do that, actually, what we'll do is just install the administrative tools here. You'll see that option. It doesn't really matter what order you do that in, to be honest, but let's get them installed. Okay, that's all done. So what we'll do now is we'll look at the process of preparing the first standard edition server. This part can take a little time to run. So what I'm going to do is just click on it and we're going to run through the options here. And it will start deploying all the components. So let's leave this to run and we'll come back to it when it's finished. That was actually surprisingly fast compared to the previous edition. So once that's done, hit finish. So what we're going to do now is fire up the topology builder and define our topology. There we go, Skype for Business Server Topology Builder. We're going to define a new topology. We need to give it a file name as per normal. If you're familiar with 2015, this is going to be very, very familiar to you. I'm going to use contoso.com for my primary SIP domain because everybody uses that. I don't need any additional SIP domains. Okay, and of course we're going to open the front end wizard. So this enables us to define a Skype for Business front end server. So I need to know what the pool FQDN is. Now we're going to choose a standard edition server, so I need to choose the FQDN of this server, which I'm pretty sure is SFB. There you go. So we're going to use that. I'm going to include conferencing, and that's it on this. But you know, if you want to later look at the voice stuff, you can go back and include that if you want, or you can include the enterprise voice bit now if you want to. In fact, let's do all of that. We'll leave the archive and monitoring off. We're going to co-locate the mediation server, so it'll install it on the same server. And at this point, I'm going to leave the edge servers out. There's the SQL store because it's a standard edition, it's local on the box. Now we need to define a file share, which I haven't done yet. This is pretty easy. We're going to put it on the same server. I'm going to create a folder called SFB share, and I'm going to share it. I tend to do it from advanced sharing. Share this folder, Skype for Business share, set the permissions. Now I'm going to be, because I'm just doing this as a quick demo, it's never going to be used properly, I'm just going to select full control for everyone. Obviously there's proper permissions you should allow for that, so have a look at the documentation. It will tell you exactly what you need to set up there. But just for the sake of this demo, everyone will do just fine. There you go, Skype for Business Share on that FQDN. I'm going to leave that unchanged. I'm not going to look at the Access Edge stuff as yet. I'm not going to put in an Office web app server or an Office online server. I haven't done that as yet, so we can perhaps revisit that later. There we go. So all we need to do now is deploy this topology. So let's do that. So right click, publish topology, and off it will go. So we have to select the front end pool that will host the CMS. Well, there's only one in our demo environment here, so we'll select that, and off it will go and deploy all this topology for us. There we go. It's finished. Now you'll see here on the click here to open a to-do list, it will tell you what you need to do next. So we need to configure some DNS records. We also need to install the server roles and all that sort of good stuff. So let's move on and do that next. We'll do the DNS next. Next then, we're going to set up the contoso.com DNS entries. Now, for me to do that, I'm just going to jump across to my domain controller. Of course, you could actually install the DNS tools under the remote server admin tools on this server if you wanted. I often do that. But I'm just going to go onto my domain controller and I'm going to fire up the DNS admin tools under administration. There we go. So in here, you'll see my forward lookup zones for Mac does stuff, but I'm going to define a new zone. I'm going to call this contoso.com. I'm just going to leave all the defaults in place. There we go. Now there's several records we need to define in here. So we're going to do a new A record for meet. We're going to do a new A record for dial-in. A new A record for admin. We need a new A record for our link discover internal. And there's also a couple of SRV records, well, one SRV record that we need to create. So I'm going to do new other, find my SRV, there we go. We're going to call this SIP internal TLS, the protocol's TCP, port is 5061, and the host offering this service is going to be your Skype for Business server. There we go. I'm also going to define a SIP A record as well. So quickly, we're just going to define another A record, call this SIP, then the IP address of our front-end server. And there we go, that's done. It's a little while since I've done that, so I had to double check what the records are. But anyway, we should now be in a position to be able to continue with our deployment. So let's jump back onto our Skype for Business server. The final step then, before we actually have a functioning platform, is just to install or update the Skype for Business server platform. So we're going to select that. There's several steps that we need to go through in here, so we'll step through them. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do, install the local configuration store. So let's run that. We're going to retrieve directly from the CMS. You should just be able to click through this and let it run. Okay, that's that bit finished, so we're going to click finish and we're going to set up and remove Skype for Business server components. Now this is the main installation routine. There we go, let's just let that run for a while. So that all finished okay. It did take a little while on this machine because my iMac Pro is a bit busy at the moment. So the next step, we're going to install some certificates or create, request, and then assign those certificates. So my domain controller has a certificate authority set up on it. So we're going to use that. I'm going to click run. The first thing I'm going to select is the default certificate and we're going to request it. So I'm just going to change the name. I'm just going to call it front-end cert. You can see at the top that we're going to be using the certificate authority on my domain controller. You can pre-populate these if you want. I want to select all the domains in my deployment, which I only have one, which is a contoso.com. I'm going to click next and then just let it go off and select that certificate. There we go, that's all completed. So the next, if you want to, you can have a look at the certificate itself. You'll see it deployed, and in there you should see all the subject alternate names. There we go. Okay, so I'm also going to allow it to assign the certificate as well. And there we go. So we need to now do the certificate for the OAuth. So again, it's the same process. We're just going to request. We can leave everything as default in here. It's going to go to the same certificate authority. There we go. And now we're going to assign it. There we go, that's our certificates done. So the final stage of this, of course, is starting the services. So if you run the services MMC, which is just services.mmc, you should see in here all your Skype for Business services. So of course you can just reboot at this point if you want, or you can just right click and start. There's quite a few of them. Okay, let's just give those a little while to catch up. Okay, it took a little while for those services to get started, but we should be in a position now where we can start to use the platform. You'll see everything's running. So before we can use the control panel, we can come out this installer now. Before we can use the control panel, we have to get a couple of prereqs in place. So we have to have Silverlight installed. I've got that on my desktop here, but I'll post the link to it down below. Let's let that install. There we go, doesn't take long at all. Okay, and the other thing I'd suggest you check is the Internet Explorer protection thing, which is in Server Manager. We're going to check the local server, and what we're interested in is the IE Enhanced Security configuration. I tend to turn it off for the administrators, like you can see there. It just makes your experience a little bit better. So once we've done that, let's go up, and you should find on your menus somewhere, let's have a look. Skype for Business server. In there you should see the control panel. So let's fire that up. Okay, we need to log in. And there we go. Now we are now in a position to be able to configure users. Now, if you are new to this platform, one thing I would warn you about is that you'll run into issues when you try and enable users that are members of elevated groups like domain admins or power users or something like that. So let me show you what I mean. So I'm going to try enable a user. I'm going to select my administrator user. There we go. I'm going to select my pool, and I'm going to specify the SAM account at contoso.com. Now if I enable this, I'm expecting an error. There you go. And the reason that's there is because the user is a member of the elevated user groups. So you can enable that user, but you need to use PowerShell. So I'm not going to go into that for the scope of this kind of build demo, but what I am going to do is start Active Directory users and computers, and you'll see my corporate setup. I have, my clients, my servers, my service accounts. So in users, I'm going to create a new demo user, and the way we do it is just create any old user, new user. I'm going to call him Derek Trotter. Give him a login name of Derek T. I'm going to change my domain suffix because I've also added another one, which is at contoso.com. It just makes the login a little bit easier to the Skype client. We're going to set him a password. There's our user. I'm also going to quickly set his email address as well. So let's set that guy up for Skype for Business. And the way we do it is under the users panel. We're going to enable a user. I'm going to select that new user that I've created. There we go. I'm going to assign him to this pool, and I'm going to use his email address to create the user. So that should be all I need to enter. There we go. So we can see that now that user is now created. Now before we can test this, of course, we need to get the Skype client on a machine. Now we can install it on the server if you want. Another video that I've got shows the Office 2016 Click to Run installer, so the one from Office 365. I've copied it to this machine, so let's fire up an elevated command prompt. There we go. and I'll put it in a directory called Office, I think. Now in here, that configure.xml defines what we're deploying. So if I look at it, you can see that this is deploying Skype for Business only, and that's it. Now, if you have a look at my other video, it kind of explains how this deployment tool works, but let's get Skype deployed. It's pretty easy. Configure.xml. So this is using the Office deployment tool to get Skype installed. Okay, that's all done. So we can exit out of that. Let's fire up the Skype client. It'll be in here somewhere. There we go, Skype for Business. So we need to enter a sign-in address. Well, in fact, we need to cancel that because that's my other user. I'm going to enter my DerekT@contoso.com. There we go. Sign in. It's going to ask for my password. And hopefully, it should sign us into the platform. And there we go. Now, of course, I don't have Exchange set up in here, so you might see some errors on Exchange, but that's taken us from nowhere through to a Skype Server 2019 deployment. So it'll give you something to play with and get familiar with, and also, you know, try and get some experience around how the platform works. I hope you found that useful. I will try and add the other roles like the Office Web Apps or Office Online Server and all that sort of stuff at some point, but this probably should be enough to get you started.